Many are wondering if Ukraine is losing the war. The situation of Ukraine is worsening. Russia has withstood much better than expected, taking advantage of the failure of Ukraine's counteroffensive and is now attacking again. However, Ukraine has now received the green light from its Western allies to strike within Russia.
Over the past few weeks, Ukraine came to us and asked for the authorization to use weapons that we're providing to defend against this aggression, including against Russian forces that are massing on the Russian side of the border and then attacking into Ukraine. That went right to the president, and as you've heard, he's approved the use of our weapons for that purpose.
The United States, France, Germany, and Poland have authorized the use of their weaponry for limited attacks, although this cannot be directed at civilian targets. Ukraine aims to prevent Russia from using its bases near the border to launch attacks like the one that occurred in Kharkiv. This represents another red line that has vanished. The calculation of Western powers is that these limited offensives will not provoke a Russian escalation, as has been the case with the dispatch of tanks and aircraft. Russia, however, has warned that this decision could have fatal consequences and accuses the West of seeking an escalation of the conflict. In early May, Russian troops broke the front in northern Kharkiv. A surprise attack with more than 30,000 troops in two directions along the border between Ukraine and Russia. It was a high-intensity combined maneuver involving planes, artillery, infantry, and armored vehicles. In a few days, Russian troops managed to create a maneuver zone less than 50 kilometers from Kharkiv. Undoubtedly, this is a meteoric success for Russia and a trauma for Ukraine, which is thus forced to disperse its units over a wider front.
I would say that the Russians, they have different targets. The fall of Kharkiv would not only have devastating impact on Ukraine's morale, but also would significantly undermine Ukraine's capacities to defend itself. But the Russians have also their goal to distract Ukrainian forces, to force Ukrainians to pull back some of their troops from Donbass, from Zaporizhia area, and bring them to the north, to Kharkiv, and also just to terrorize the Ukrainians, to spread fears among the country, to force dozens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in Ukraine to leave their homes.
Beyond the early months of the war, Kharkiv had been experiencing relative calm compared to the other regions of Ukraine. If the Russian pincer manages to penetrate deeply, Ukraine could lose all the territories it recovered in its first counteroffensive in September 2022.
And why the Ukrainians didn't build fortifications directly at the border? Out of a very simple reason, because the Russians constantly shelled this area. So if the Ukrainians would have created fortifications there, the Russians would perfectly know their location. That's why the Ukrainians have created fortification line a bit deeper behind this first gray zone, and that is where the Russians stopped.
Kiev maintains that most of its defenses are already positioned near the city, and it is better for Ukraine that this is the case, because the loss of Kharkiv would mark a turning point into the conflict. But Russia is increasingly confident in the success of its strategy. The new defense minister, an economist by training, is also a member of the sector that openly supports the military invasion of Ukraine. His profile is that of a technician, and his goal is to speed up the production of tanks and ammunition. Russia has understood that it cannot win with a straightforward offensive. Its strategy is to slowly exhaust Ukraine's resources and will, and for this, it needs many more weapons. And time is Ukraine's main enemy. According to the Ukrainian ministry, to face the Russians, 20,000 shells are needed each day, but Ukraine was receiving, at the peak of aid influx, about 9,000, a figure that in recent months has dropped to 2,000.
So now we have a situation when, for the Ukrainians, most probably, the wish scenario which they will try to implement is to destroy as much as Russian troops along the front line, while preserving as much as own troops from being destroyed.
According to calculations by Wall Street Journal, Russia has increased the number of drone and missile attacks by more than 45% in the past year. This has been possible because its war industry is full swing and manages to deliver more armament. And thus, Russia has managed to saturate the Ukrainians' heel. On the other hand, the rate of air attacks intercepted by the Ukrainian anti-air force has dropped from 73% to 45%. Most of these missiles come from territories near Russia, as French President Emmanuel Macron explained.
Le sol ukrainien, oui, est attaqué, de fait, depuis des bases et qui sont en Russie. Alors comment on explique aux Ukrainiens qu'il va falloir protéger ces villes et au fond tout ce qu'on voit en ce moment autour de Kharkiv, si on leur dit vous n'avez pas le droit d'atteindre le point d'où sont tirés?
And that is why Western allies, after much resistance, have authorized attacks within Russian territory, but with many limitations. For example, they can only be used on the Kiev front. The goal is to take away the Kremlin's strategic advantage of being able to attack through border bases with impunity. However, the attacks can only be directed against military infrastructures, such as radars, bases, or launch stations, like the large Armavir radar antenna in the Krasnodar area, which is the cornerstone of the warning network that detects ballistic missiles aimed at Russia, an attack that has provoked a very harsh reaction from Moscow.
The Ukrainians understand that this war will continue for at least 1 year, 2025. So now for Ukraine, the main goal is to get new weapons from the West, deal with the West regarding how these weapons can be used, what targets can be hit.
But there are more problems for Ukraine. The main one is the lack of soldiers. In fact, in April, the Ukrainian parliament lowered the recruitment age from 27 to 25 years, and it decided to limit exemptions. This ensures more soldiers are available, but what maybe has been lost is the spirit of victory. If in the first months of the conflict there was a mass of volunteers willing to fight, now everyone has understood that it is a long war, and among the Ukrainian population there is frustration and a desire to return to a normal life. And that is why some Western countries like France no longer rule out the possibility of sending soldiers in a case of a possible Ukrainian defeat. For now, there has been talk of military trainers who should facilitate the training of Ukrainian troops.
And of course, there are negotiations right now with some countries, NATO countries, Baltic countries, Poland, France, to send some troops to Ukraine, not to fight, but for example, to guard Ukrainian border to Belarus or to Russia-occupied part of Moldova. If NATO could send these troops, Ukraine could release troops which are currently patrolling this border and send them to the front line as additional troops. The situation on the front is really on the edge. And adding, let me say, 5 or 10% of capacities to your troop may be decisive for the battle.
In this context, the situation for Ukraine becomes increasingly difficult. The combination of a failed counteroffensive, the constant pressure from a revitalized Russian army, and the diminishing international support has created a bleak scenario. The new Western aid to Ukraine will, on one hand, allow greater resistance to Russian attacks, but at the same time, it risks bringing a direct conflict with Russia and Europe even closer.